One, two, three, four.
Hello, you're listening to the Skylight Books podcast series. We are a general interest independent bookstore located in the Los Feliz neighborhood of Los Angeles, California. This year, because of the coronavirus pandemic, we've had to close our store and cancel in-person events. But Skylight is your neighborhood bookstore, and we are finding ways to create community even while we're far apart. In the coming weeks, we'll be putting out lots of new audio content to help you discover new books, connect with authors, and check in with your favorite booksellers. To learn more about how you can help keep Skylight alive, please visit our website at skylightbooks.com or check out our social media accounts on Twitter and Instagram. You can subscribe to the podcast on Podbean, iTunes, and Spotify. Thank you for listening and enjoy.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our latest episode of Skylight Books' podcast series, where we talk to authors from near and far in the comfort of their own rooms. Today, we are very excited to be hosting Andrés Neuman in conversation with Chad Post. I'm going to introduce our conversationalists today. Andrés Neuman was born in 1977 in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and grew up in Spain. Neuman was selected as one of Granta's best of young Spanish-language novelists and was elected to the Bogotá 39 list. Traveler of the Century was the winner of the Alfaguara Prize and the National Critics Prize, Spain's two most prestigious literary awards, as well as a special commendation from the jury of the Independent Foreign Fiction Prize. Neuman has taught Latin American literature at the University of Granada. Chad Post is the founder and publisher of Open Letter Books at the University of Rochester, a press dedicated to publishing literature and translation, which he founded in 2007. In addition, he runs the 3% website, which receives more than 750,000 visits per year and is home to the translation database, the 3% podcast, and the Best Translated Book Awards. Welcome, Andrés and Chad.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
It's great to see you again, Andrés.
Yeah, it's been a long time. This is the only way to meet you again is a pandemic, apparently.
For the moment, we will have future ping pong playing times in person again.
I do really look forward to it, and thank you very much for having us, Maddie. It's an honor for me, and I really love what you're doing while this madness is running. Thank you for keeping literature working.
I'm doing my best, and thank you for being here, Andrés. All right, so you want to start us off with a short reading?
Yes, sure. This is small paragraphs on the different laughters from different people coming from this novel, Fracture. I've always thought that the way we laugh reveals who we really are. We can put on a face, adopt a tone, control our gestures, but it's very difficult to laugh insincerely. I've known laughs that are nervous like their owners, tight-lipped laughs that conceal more than they show, or shrill laughs desperate for attention. Some are strangely long-winded and don't want to end, as if masking pain, while others grow gradually louder as they gain confidence. Some are a single burst that cleaves the air before snapping shut like a knife. Others sound rough because they've been through a lot. None of these describe his laugh.
Very cool. Very cool. So I think
Should I laugh now? Should I laugh now? Or
laugh, yeah.
to give you provide
laugh.
Oh, it was a sincere laugh anyway.
I have a 2-year-old who's experimenting with different laugh styles as of late, which is very fun. Like maniacal laughs, like naughty laughs, like he's trying out a whole different bunch of laughing options.
That's certainly an exercise in style. It sounds a bit Ulipo thing in childhood.
Exactly. Gotta figure out what works, man. What works in what situations. One thing I wanted to start with is we should probably, for the sake of anyone listening that hasn't read the book yet, give some sort of just general overview of fracture. And so the book has like kind of two parts to it that are interspersed. One is the story of, I want to get his name right, Yoshie Watanabe, who grew up, who lost his father in Hiroshima and the rest of his family in the bombing of Nagasaki the next day, but he survived and lived a long life. And the book begins with March 11th, 2011, with the earthquakes that led to the tsunami that led to the Fukushima nuclear plant disaster. And so his story takes place kind of in the present, going forward from there, and as he goes to Fukushima to see what's happening there and to like connect with himself. In between there are 4 narratives by 4 women who were involved with his life throughout the career of his whole life. So you get to see his background through these other voices that are being told. And I was really fascinated. I've always been fascinated. We've had this conversation about talking to ourselves before when you came and spoke in my class, and we've talked about travel over the century a bit, but the structures that you use in your books are really interesting to me. And I think they feel very well crafted. And I'm wondering how you came to design this book in this way, and what you think it was accomplishing to have it structured as you ended up structuring it.
Thank you. That's brilliant summary, actually. Well, I've been always interested in voice and in tone for literature. I don't mean with this or by this that I don't care about plots. This, snobbery about, oh, it doesn't matter if you've got 500 pages telling nothing in particular. I'm not that kind of snob reader, but certainly I do think that story and plot usually or very often is a consequence of the search of the voice. Mm-hmm. Like the voice leads you to understand the story you're trying to tell, or in other words, that you can have a plot, a very polished and clear plot, but it will be certainly modified and sometimes drastically changed once you know how the voice sounds. So I've been always fascinated by this. You were talking about exercising yourself in different laughters.
Yeah.
And that in a way connects with an experience of my childhood, doctor, that maybe helps to understand this, my childhood. Because I changed country when I was a boy, my family exiled right after the dictatorship in Argentina. And my family exiled from one country speaking Spanish to some other country who speak Spanish. Mm-hmm. So in a way, I did change of intonation, accent, pronunciation, feeling a foreigner of my own mother tongue. And probably that was a literary experience to becoming suspicious about my own language. So I've been always interested in rehearsing different ways of saying the same thing. So that probably led me to the interest in telling a story with different voices and changing perspective. And in this case, I thought it would be nice, instead of describe female characters typically observed from a male point of view, and even worse, explained from a male point of view, I found it interesting to attempt the opposite, like a silent man who's remembered, fantasized, and told from strong female perspective. But this narrative choice is also a kind of metaphor of how we sometimes find it hard to express our most important or most painful feelings without the need of someone else. I suppose that sometimes we need the people we love to learn about our own story. So I find it interesting, this game of a man who is supposed to be at the center of the story, but he barely says a word. Yeah. So all the intimate things about him, you need to find them through the people who met him. But these versions of this character are sometimes contradictory. So you never know if he's been changing through time and space, or he was simply interpreted in different ways depending on who he was with. And I found this very interesting too. When we travel or we meet new people, we rehearse new personalities, right? Like we all feel kind of free when we meet someone for the first time, because that person doesn't have a preconception about you. So maybe you can try to be funnier than usual, or more serious than usual, or more risky than usual. So this experience is set in this novel radically, because he becomes a fully new person, because he changes language, he changes country, and he changes couple every time he emigrates. And finally, it's as well not only for people, in this case for women, talking about this mysterious character, but they are talking about different ages. And I think that's very important, because I'm a bit fed up of this notion of love experience as an adventure for young and beautiful and gleaming people, like all of them taken from Instagram. I prefer to think about love as a form of art, and art takes your own life to exercise yourself in. So what these four women do is telling different love stories in four different ages. So in a way, the whole novel is a meditation on the stages and changes of our love experiences while the time goes by.
That's really interesting. That makes a lot of sense, and that does fit really well with what I like best about the book. In some ways, is I really like the sections with the former girlfriends describing him, and because he is, and it is, like you say, contradictory, but there's also a sense of like when his parts are being narrated, they're very clean, they're very scrubbed, they're very sanitized compared to like the parts that the women say, and like the little things about his anger issues or about like what he had and how he did things. Those little flaws are not part of his narrative, they're coming out through the other, and you get to start putting together kind of like a 3D puzzle of like what this character is like. And I think you're right, it's really interesting that he doesn't really speak of his own past in that way, that it is coming through these other people.
And this is linked with another issue, which is which the novel deals with, is how we speak about our traumas in general, and how we do communicate them to the people we love. So first of all, the most radical experiences in humankind, tragically enough, are difficult to communicate. Instead of being full of words about them, for instance, when people come back from war, or from torture, or from rape, or whatever violent and horrible thing, instead of having much to say about it, you're kind of blocked. Language is not enough, because you have an experience that not many people share with you. So it's as if you have a silent language that nobody can translate. So I was interested in researching the different ways how different people in different countries have dealt with this issue. For instance, people like my family who were exiled or persecuted or tortured in my birth country. For example, my aunt was tortured and she was finally released. She disappeared and reappeared, thanks God. And she never told about this experience, never described this to their family until 30 years later. And she told me in order for me to write it. So it took 30 years to share this. I researched, the Spanish Civil War victims, and of course the Japanese victims of the A bombs. And I found out that even though all those contexts were really different, both culturally and politically, they shared in common this difficulty with the power of words turned into the nightmare of silence, the impossibility to share linguistically these experiences with the other people. So the way with the third person narration follows the silent man tries to be as well a symbol for how he cannot tell his intimate or most painful story. So the other people have to do that for him, the people who loved him. And secondly, I was really thrilled to tell a story where a person tries different strategies in his couples, the people he lived with, and I'm sure we all have had this problem, even though it's not necessarily a really tragic thing, but you have something to hide in your life, and you don't know if you should say it to the people you just fell in love with. So this guy, Mr. Watanabe, the first of the 4 love stories, he decides not to speak about it because he wants to be new for her, saying, let's be an entirely new man, so I won't share this load with her. And she finds out late and in a bad way, and she gets really angry and she feels betrayed because she thinks, well, if he didn't tell me this, such an important thing of his life to me, he was probably lying to me in so many other ways.
Yeah.
So he says, okay, so I should not hide this. Okay. So the second chance he falls in love, he says, I'm going to tell you right away.
Yeah.
But he finds out that it's a bit too, it feels a bit too violent, a bit too aggressive, because the other person says, I don't know if I'm ready to hear this so soon.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't share intimacy, so maybe you should have waited for a bit longer. So he says, okay, you shouldn't hide it, but you shouldn't say it too soon. So the third time he meets a woman who has been through a long therapy, as is very usual in my country, in Argentina. Everybody gets a therapy. We are obsessed with that. My parents have been there for 15 years. It's a kind of second pathology, the pathology of researching your pathology. So it's a meta pathology. So he, for the first time, meets a person who wants to know more than he wants to share. Mm-hmm. So she's constantly saying, tell me more. And how did you feel? And he thinks, well, maybe this is a bit too much. So he learns, I shouldn't say too much, but I shouldn't say too little about this. Mm-hmm. So the fourth time and the last time he arrives to the 4th love story when he's old. He's now trained in sharing his story. He feels more open, but he meets this Spanish woman who is not that much in therapy. Actually, she hates therapies. So every time he tries to raise the issue, the topic, she says, oh, forget about it. Don't be obsessed with your trauma. You're going to be repeating it on and on. So he said, okay, so I should remember it and not hiding it, but not sharing it too soon, but not sharing it too much, but not sharing it too little. So what he learns is you won't always find the right time and the right way to share this. So the novel is about how to collect the pieces of the secrets we hide and how to share them with the people we love.
That's really interesting. I like related to that, because there is like there's so much trauma that's involved in like as like a national trauma for Hiroshima, and then there's also like the trauma that came from the earthquake, the tsunami, and the power plant implosion. How did you get interested? Why did you end up writing about this particular character? How did that come to be? It's such a global novel. It's like if someone like said like, oh, here's a book by an Argentine writer living in Spain about a Japanese person, you'd be like, wait, what? That seems like it's kind of like that. So I'm curious how you got obsessed with this particular moment and this character and how that came to be. And also related to that, like how much research did you have to do to be able to reconstruct this? Because it's really in depth.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, that was a hard job. well, there's, first of all, there's my own displacement at play, of course.
Mhm.
So I was searching for a character even more migrant than myself, to observe this kind of issue from the distance, both culturally, because he's from a faraway country. And I think that narrative makes sense because you can observe yourself from the distance. That's why we invent stories, because it's a distance system to just like to look at yourself at the mirror. You need to step back, right? Otherwise, your breath will cover the mirror. So the same reason, the same reason why we need stories. So on the one hand, I was searching for a kind of a super migrant fictional character.
Mhm.
And this man really do travels because his job forces him to change outfits and countries a few times, and even languages in his life, which led me to one of my favorite topics again, which is translation.
Yeah.
He needs to be constantly translating his emotions to languages he doesn't speak very fluently. So he needs to work with a gap, not only cultural gap, but linguistic gap. But I've been always obsessed with Japan since I was a child. The movies, the I don't know how to say this in English, but anime or manga or whatever. When I was a child, then I fell in love with Japanese cinema, and then finally I arrived to the books, and I'm really fond of Japanese books. So there was this in the background, like my love for Japan, like many years ago, like playing ping pong and loving Japan when I was a child.
Yeah.
And then many years passed, and I learned two things about Japan that really struck me. First of them, I read about a man called um, Yamaguchi, Tsutomu Yamaguchi, who was, and this is really truly incredible for me, who was a survivor of both atomic bombs. But I mean, unlike my character, he was in Hiroshima doing business.
Mm-hmm.
He survived the bomb in the August 6th, 1945. He was supposedly lucky enough to get a train because incredibly the trains resumed their travels like a couple of days after the bombs. That's a summary of what Japan is.
Yeah.
You drop a bomb and the trains go back at work 2 days later. So he managed to catch one of those trains to Nagasaki where he lived, thinking he was safe at last at home, trying to describe this thing that didn't exist or had a narrative because nobody knew what the A-bomb was. So he was trying to describe to his boss what he had just witnessed, and a second bomb hit him and killed his boss and his family. But he survived again. Wow. So in 3 days, he survived 2 bombs. To top this all, Chad, he lived for 90 years.
Wow.
So he was the closest to immortality that humankind can meet, surviving 2 atomic bombs and living almost a century.
Yeah.
So this man, who to me was like a kind of fantastic character, like a fictional character, but he existed. He died, wisely enough, just a few months before the Fukushima accident. Oh, wow. So he didn't see the repetition of history. Mm-hmm. So when I saw the Fukushima accident, immediately I thought, what would he have felt and thought if he had witnessed the repetition of history? So I invented a character who does witness the repetition of history, so needs to reread all his memories through this. But when the earthquake happened in Japan in March 11, I read that the axis of the planet shifted by a few centimeters, the whole axis of the planet. And I thought, isn't this a perfect metaphor of how we are hit by what happens elsewhere? We usually live as if we don't care about the other countries, and then we're suddenly stuck in a pandemic that started in China and by turns are hitting the whole planet. Think about climate change or extreme pollution. Everything that matters cannot be divided geographically. It's just about our planet that we share selfishly. So I thought that these nuclear tragedies really show you how it's pointless to divide, territories. Take Chernobyl, for instance. The worst part was for Belarusia, and they didn't even have nuclear power centers.
Yeah.
But they were more affected. So the sea doesn't belong to anyone in particular. The air doesn't belong to anyone in particular. So the novel, in a way, is about all the borderless forces that drive our life. Energy, economy, fear, and of course, love.
Yeah.
So I was interested, in a character that was bit by bit covering the whole planet with some pretext. And this pretext is, the technology company he works for.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. So I think this is a good point for you to read a couple more passages.
Yeah, sure. In fact, I could read maybe a paragraph that covers this topic of traveling too much until you don't know where you belong.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure I'm gonna mispronounce a few of these, but it will be for your amusement anyway. With his accumulation of comings and goings, transfers and moves, Mr. Watanabe developed an emotional ubiquity. Each of his emotions was, partially at least, always somewhere else. He had started to feel in harmony. This ruthlessness wasn't confined to space. Intimacy with his loved ones became problematic. He no longer knew how to be with anyone undividedly. No sooner had he attained an instant of fulfillment than half of him was already envisaging his next move, going over travel arrangements, planning tasks in distant places. Nor did making those journeys alleviate his restlessness. His other half, no less sincerely, longed for the refuge of home and to lounge about in pajamas on Sundays.
Very good. Very good. I love this. I love your writing. I love this book quite a bit. It was very trippy when I started reading it because I got home from being overseas on March 15th and opened it up and started reading it. I was here alone, self-quarantine style. And the first thing that happens is like March 11th, there's this earthquake and he's like, can't get toilet paper. And it's like, oh my God, I don't know that I'm ready for this, especially because March 11th this year was when they announced that it was a pandemic, who announced that it's like a cursed date.
Yeah. I do hope, yeah, you're right. And the other day we were talking that in March 11, there was as well the bombs in Madrid.
Yep.
And it was, of course, exactly 6 months before the anniversary of the 9/11. So it's a kind of a round, horrible date, March the 11th. But at the same time, I was talking with a friend trying to make a more optimistic approach, that if this fucking date works just like the virus, I'm sure it will get some kind of immunity, because so many horrible things happen in this date that nowadays the safest date ever should be March 11, because nothing else can happen to that day.
This is like a Borgesian sort of logic of like, if you can envision exactly what will happen, it can't happen because you've already envisioned it and things
exactly. So if someone tries, to point me with a gun someday and it's March 11, I will say, no, you're wrong. This is too unlikely to happen. So please go away and come back in a more likely, in a more plausible date, please.
That's perfect. There's, ironically, so your book came out here in the States on May 5th, which is the same exact date that we brought out one of your country women, Sarah Mesa's 4x4. And
very fine writer. Very fine writer.
And she's spectacular, and the book's spectacular. And it was weird because up until that was coming out, we had been talking about it as being sort of like a Shirley Jackson meets Jeffrey Epstein sort of book, because it's about like caging people. There's lots of metaphors that worked for that related to like the Epstein story for that book. The second that this COVID things happens, all of a sudden when everyone's in lockdown, this book takes on a wholly different interpretation of like in 4x4 is all about being in a space and what the power structures are within that space. And by walling yourself in, you don't eliminate that. You don't save yourself. You put yourself in a position where there can be more power things. And so when I started reading this, when I got back into it and really like went into it, it's weird to be reading this through that new lens. And I wonder how you think as a writer that like you wrote this without COVID being a thing, and then COVID comes and there is something that like resonates with that as like things have been fractured, things are broken. There's like the way that people are processing this trauma, which may not be the same as like a nuclear bomb trauma, but it is a trauma for a lot of people, and gives a sense of like, how do you go forward? And like you say, like Japan had the trains running in 2 days, the tsunami like killed 18,500 people, but yet like there were so many things in place that could have been a much worse number, that Japan is very much geared towards like preparation and to be able to go ahead and go forward and process what's happened. And I just wonder for your perspective from having worked on this for a number of years and then having it come out in this weird moment in English and how it gets reinterpreted, if that's changed the way that you think about your own book.
Oh, you're totally right. Actually, when the confinement began, a few people began tweeting the lines where the character of Fracture is trying to buy toilet paper and it sold out. And it is true. Of course, I wasn't thinking about the future, but I think that if we closely observe the past, we do get the keys, the secrets for the future. And well, you mentioned Borges, and in a way, Borges was a bit against this idea of overacting your national tradition, like it's a bit like writing for the tourist thing, like saying, hey, we are gauchos, we are La Pampas, we sing tangos, and please don't move from that frame because I will get lost, Yeah. So the culture, the national culture as a postcard, so to speak. And Borges actually was one of the first ones to try to refutate. I don't know how to say this in English, by the way.
Yeah, you got it. Refute.
Yeah. This. Thank you. Borges was much better at English, by the way. Well, thinking about this, Borges was supposed to read the Quixote first in English. Well, he was raised in a house where English was almost a native tongue. This is why. And he said, I don't believe this is true, but it doesn't matter because it's a good story, that he read the Quixote first in English and he loved it a lot. And when he found the original, he found it very badly translated into Spanish. So this funny anecdote, regardless it is true or not, summarizes how he was mistrusting the two folk essential national identities, right? So he said that the Latin American feature, well, he said the Argentine feature, but I would go wider. One of the Latin American features for writing is feeling that maybe the English literature or Shakespeare or the French realistic novelists or whatever belong to our tradition because our tradition is shorter and younger, and we've been colonized for so long that we feel that elsewhere there are things that made us too, and we've got loads of immigration going. So half my family came from Europe, and now we went back to Europe. So what I mean is that really this playing with the global and the local constantly, I find it a very Argentinian thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, it's true that this pandemic not only will generate a bit too much of books, a bit too much of narrations and movies, but more importantly, will reshape our memories.
Yeah.
Will lead us to reread all what happened, to understand how we finished here. And this is even a political thing, because all the conservative people is saying, oh, the virus is democratic, it can kill you no matter you're black or white, you're rich or poor. That's not true, obviously, because if you are rich, you have better doctors. If you rely on public healthcare system, you are more likely to die. So we, even from a medical point of view, we need to understand why our healthcare system was so bad right before the pandemic happened. Yeah. So both narratively, politically, economically, we will need to think what will happen to all the people who are without a job in America. Dozens of millions I've read now without the job, meaning without a healthcare system. Yep. So maybe this is what we feared when we were discussing the topic of whether the public system should be stronger or not. So the most important thing is not only the future, but the new meaning that the past will acquire after this. That's what art does, right? That's why we still read the Greeks or the Latin Rome authors, because the past. Well, I think that Italo Calvino said that a classic book is a book that never finishes to say what the book has to say. And that's perfectly true for tragedies. The very first quote in my novel comes from the great Polish poet. We can add that to the list. And to top it all, a Polish poet. And, and he says, if something exists somewhere, it will exist everywhere. If something exists somewhere, it will exist everywhere. That's a perfect definition for COVID-19. Only this is a poem from more than half a century ago.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Very interesting. There's another question I was going to ask you is, well, one thing that you remind me as you're talking about that and the global, local, the idea of like national writings as being sort of travelogues or like postcards or, for the tourist, is that you've always resisted that. Like Traveler of the Century is from different point of time, different place. It sort of reminds me of like the crack group from the like 90s, mid 90s in Mexico that were adamantly like, we're not going to write what's expected of us for Mexican fiction. We're going to write about the rest of the world and be more global than that. And I was curious, I forget what my point was without that, but I was curious about who's influenced you in like your thinking about aesthetics and writing and literature. Like, who are your idols that you look up to and that have freed you to like not write that sort of literature?
Well, to start with, I'm not at all against writing about my closest community, and I've done that a few times. You've got a couple of books coming about that. We cannot talk much about this, but I mean, I love, like local small stories, and I've written at least 2 novels about my Argentinian roots. So I don't mean I think writers shouldn't write about that. Much on the contrary, I love to read and write that. But I find it a bit ethnocentric, in a subtle way, to say, hey, leave Shakespeare for the serious white Anglo-Saxon guys, So just do your talk about your people, whoever they are, and leave us, the Greek classics for the people who are entitled, for it. So in a way, it's not allowing someone from a distant country to talk about what you think is the canon. Mm-hmm. So demolishing the canon is not only, I think, about expanding it, making it broader and less wasp, you say?
Yeah. Yep.
Not only that, which is of course fundamental, but as well is, I think, understanding that maybe a Mexican Chicano person has read Shakespeare better than you. That can happen. In fact, Borges kind of rescued a few so-called minor writers from the British tradition when they were not very highly regarded, like Kipling, Stevenson, De Quincey. In the beginning of the 20th century, they were not the top authors in the British tradition. So kind of Borges gave them back to the British readers to say, hey, they were great. Didn't you read them closely? So he kind of changed their own tradition. And the other way around, of course, we've got this Polish guy, Gombrowicz, who came to Argentina and changed our entire national tradition, not even writing a single word in Spanish.
Yep.
He needed translation, so he kept on writing in Polish language for decades in Buenos Aires. And when he left, our literature had changed, and he didn't even need to learn our language. So that can happen all the time, and it does. And I think of all the people who, and this is my answer to your question, the people who influenced me the most probably were, among many others, the people who had to change frame or language drastically. So I'm really interested in, the cases like Conrad or Nabokov or Beckett. And at the same time, I'm really interested in Argentinian women poets from the dictatorship.
Oh, yeah.
Because there's a kind of a macho official history of how the resistance was, all the people with the guns fighting against the dictatorship. Yeah. And there were, by the way, women among them as well. But it was mainly a very straight male thing. And so my wife did a PhD on Argentinian female poets of the period, and she found that they were using symbols in a very different way. For instance, they took the very much supported theory, because it comes from old times, that the carnival was a kind of liberating way of transforming your identity, like wearing a mask is a way of freedom.
Yeah.
Carnival as a way of transforming things. This has been like a cliche in the literary theory for many years. And it comes from the Russian Bakhtin theories. And my wife, and I learned a lot from her, by the way, she's a poet too. She found out that these women poets from Argentina in the 80s were using the symbols of carnival and mask in a total opposite way, as a way of avoiding from you to show your true identity, to living on the closet, to living hiding. So it was a kind of oppression, the oppressive, dark carnival of being permitted, allowed to do certain things only if you hide your identity. So I was highly influenced by those poets who were very related to poets like Anne Sexton, Sylvia Plath, or in the Spanish language, Alejandra Pizarnik.
Yeah.
And now we talk about Borges. Lastly, I would like to mention a wonderful writer from Argentina who was a good friend of Borges, and now she's being re-emerging, I understand, in the States, Silvina Ocampo.
Yes.
Silvina Ocampo, who was not only a bright short story writer, but as well a very interesting poet herself. And I was very glad to find that she was translated into English a few years ago as a poet. and in Argentina nobody reads her poetry. And then again, United States has given us back the poetry from Silvino Campo, which nobody reads now in Argentina, but you are reading it, and now we are allowed to see it under a different light, thanks to English translation.
Those, yeah, the way that that's all connected is always so fascinating, and how like people can be rediscovered based on a translation coming out in another country can lead to like a more global movement. I mean, that happened with Lispector in a lot of ways not too long ago. Like when the Lispector books were reissued, there was like a global surge in interest in Lispector. So it's very interesting how that's all connected. I have two comments. I know that we're getting close to our time, but one thing is you mentioned writing about translation, about how translation comes in your books quite frequently, and I want to say that you write very sexy things about translation. Like there's the way that you write about it is kind of hot. I'm just going to put that out there for people. To Traveler of the Century for sure has a lot of like translation and sex scene. And but Fracture does as well, has like certain mentions where it's like there's like a loving like sensualness to translation that comes through in your prose, which I really dig. So I think that is like, I don't know where you're getting that from, but I love it.
No, it's true because I usually get bored of literature, talking about literature, when they do it in a kind of a scholar way, like saying, hey, I've got all these pieces of my PhD that they weren't included, so maybe I can write a novel with
yeah.
I left out from my PhD. So I think writing fiction is an entirely different thing. Of course, you can be influenced by your researches or your classes, but the rules are totally different. So every time I approach a very like theoretical subject, I try to do it with the body. Mm-hmm. You know, that the word, that's the thing that I love the most of Roberto Bolaño.
Yeah.
In the Spanish language, we usually have these two totally opposite models. The model of the modid poet, you know, like the 19th century French type, like, or the Beat Generation poet, that kind of idea of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. So you're supposed not to work very hard on your style. You won't be name dropping much because you're, you know, drinking at the bar. And again, this is a very like macho thing, you know, like Bukowski or Hemingway's hard self-restraint thing. Or you had the Borges model, you know, reading a library within which there's a library, within there's a library, but there's no body at all. Like Borges had no body. There's no sex in Borges. There are only two stories with sex in Borges. And one is very like, not sexy, but violent and horrible. And the second one is very, very prudish, and it's with the light off. So literally, they turn the light off. So our major writer on literature has no body. And suddenly, what Bolaño did was being at the bar, quoting weird French poets.
Yeah.
So I've always liked that. I'm not saying he was the first one to do this, but what I'm saying is that his entire body of work is built under this attempt to unite the so-called high culture with the very dirty body issues. And so I try to develop this idea and doing it constantly too. And I've been researching a lot in my books about the relationship between love and translation. Mm-hmm. Not only sex, but love. Like, because I think that when you want to translate a text, you first fall in love with someone you don't know in person, normally. it's like a platonic
Right.
attraction. There's the desire. There's the longing for that voice. There's a kind of need to be closer to that voice, and you start translating it. I do a bit of translation myself, not much. I'm not a pro at all, but I've been translating a few things, and it's a kind of cohabiting, you know, like sharing your daily life with a stranger that gradually becomes your friend or your love. And sometimes you discover things about yourself translating this stranger. So there's lots of parallels, but the other way around, it works too. Because when you find in love, this is a good mistake. Find in love, no, fall in love. I invented a phrasal verb, a weird phrasal verb. When you fall in love with someone, you become very attentive to the nuances. You become obsessed with what the other person meant. You reread words. Language becomes highly important, and you're really worried not to understand the frame of the background. And the more you love this person, the more likely you are to misunderstand this person and project your own identity and feelings on the screen of this person. And you get concerned about this, but you develop a kind of addiction to it too. So you know that there's like a mutual learning. Both people expand in best of cases, but at the same time, you know you're bound to misinterpret and misunderstand the other voice. And those are concerns and problems you do get a lot when you translate.
Yeah.
So in a way, loving someone is trying to translate someone and failing. And translating a text is falling in love with another voice and trying to love the best you can and probably failing too.
I love that. That's great. The last thing I wanted to ask you is, did you get to go to Japan to research this?
That's a beautiful question. You know, I was thinking about that a lot because you mentioned the research.
Mm-hmm.
And I researched for this book for 4 or 5 years, like a crazy person. Really, I almost only read Japanese books, saw Japanese films, interviewed people who lived in Japan. I saw numberless documentaries. And then I had to decide whether I was going to Japan to take notes. I usually do that.
Yeah.
But I suddenly decided not to, because I thought, maybe I was wrong, but I thought if I go there for just a few days or a few weeks, I will get like a touristic experience, and I will, you know, pay attention to what everybody sees when they go to Japan, you know, and I won't get any more personal feeling. So I should go there and stay living there for, you know, half a life, or at least for a few years, to get a meaningful Japanese experience, you know, learned very good language, which I, you know, studied just a bit for the book, but I should go there and really learn their traditions to be properly influenced by their culture. But if I didn't do that, and I couldn't, I decided to have a dreamy idea of the national culture, because the character is not a samurai, is not a green tea ceremony, is not someone who always lived in Japan, but he is a Japanese foreigner. He spent most of his life outside his native country. So I decided to create a mixture between researching very seriously the cultural and artistic sources from Japan and being really far away, hoping that that could get a feeling of half belonging and half not. And what I did as well is researching very much on kintsugi, this Japanese technique of repairing a piece of pottery or whatever by reuniting the fragments with gold powder in order to emphasize the cracks instead of hiding them. And I thought it would be nice to apply this idea of a thing being more beautiful and having more value after being broken.
Yeah.
This could be applied to people, love relationships, and politics.
Very true. That's really interesting. That's a really interesting perspective. Well, hopefully they'll translate the book into Japanese and bring you on a big tour.
They are. You know, this is the most exciting thing. Let me tell you only this, and we close. You know what? I was really concerned and scared about how the Japanese might react to my book, because even though I read thousands of witness from people who were there, you know, with the bombings, and I saw numberless documentaries and all that, and I really tried to absorb all the best Japanese art in order to learn a little bit more about it. I was terrified about, you know, saying silly things about it because I'm a Western person who doesn't understand the culture, which is true, by the way. And then they buy the rights in Japan for the first time in my life.
Wow.
I mean, all the rest of my books were not acquired in Japan. And interestingly enough, they bought this book. So when the translator wrote to me, I asked him, look, if there's something that sounds, you know, like stupid or out of frame or unlikely for a Japanese character, please do correct it, because you know much better than me. So don't be too faithful to what I wrote if I made mistakes. And he said, you know what? Maybe there are, you know, 3 or 4 small details that I will adjust, because maybe a Japanese reader won't feel them quite right. But most of it, what surprised me the most, is that the book says things that we don't feel comfortable saying here. It's politically incorrect.
Yeah.
Because you seem to have written them without knowing they shouldn't be said. So he, in a way, found it liberating, not because I know better than him, because obviously I don't, but because I was coming from the outside. So I could name or observe or say things with a kind of innocence. And that innocence, he found it in a way useful, because I didn't know what the taboos were really.
Yeah.
So I was right to them without knowing it. So sometimes, you know, a stranger can teach you things about yourself, and that's why we love fiction and traveling, I suppose.
Totally agree. That seems like a perfect place to end today too.
Yes, I agree. Thank you both so much. It was such a privilege to sit here and listen to you talking. Oh my gosh, what a great conversation.
That was really fun. Thank you, Andres.
Thank you. I really had a great time, and I wish we can do this again in person, ideally. And when I really miss you, Chad. I really want to see you, not this way.
Yeah, I know. But in real life, yeah, it'll happen soon. It'll happen sooner than we think.
Hey, Maddie, please send us your links.
Yeah,
I will. I definitely will.
Both the illustrations and a few stories.
I promise I will.
Please do.
All right. Well, I'm going to close our conversation. Thank you all so much for listening. Andrés Neumann's new book is Fracture, and it's out from FSG. Check it out.
Thank you for listening to the Skylight Books podcast series. Please don't forget to visit our website at skylightbooks.com and make sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Also, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast for more author talks and bookseller conversations. You can find us on Podbean, iTunes, and Spotify. Stay safe and healthy, and we hope to see you back in our store soon.